Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. As you're joining the room, please let us know if you like where you are tuning in from, potentially in our chat function. It's always great to see where everyone is around Australia and around the world. We'll get started pretty quickly because we've got quite a lot to get through. Just give everyone one more second and then we'll get going. So good morning, everyone. My name is Danny. I'm part of the team at Blackbird. Today, I'm really excited to have Startup Advisor, hello from Melbourne, Startup Advisor Investor and CEO of Clarke Advisory, Michael Ilczynski, here with us today. Before founding Clarke Street, Michael was the CEO to Asia Pacific and Americas for Seek. So we're in good hands today. So in this session, you'll hear from Michael on how to introduce MVP GTM capability to your organization. He's going to talk about scaling GTM through people and developing your GTM capability to commercial excellence. So this should be a really great session. We're going to leave, as always, 10 minutes at the end for your questions. So please put those questions into the Q&A function and we'll make sure we can get to them. You can start throwing them in as we're going along, just in case you forget. So I'll make sure we get to all of those as soon as possible. So I'm going to hand it straight over now to Michael. He's got some slides for us and throw those questions in. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Danny. I'm just going to get my screen up and running. I'll just check that you can see that and we're all good. Fantastic. Just get the right one up here. Great. Good morning, everyone. Sorry, now we're good to go. Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. It's great to be part of the Giants presentation. And as Danny said, what I want to talk today about is about building a go-to-market capability. Now, the context is really important. So what do I mean by a go-to-market capability? And just to be really clear, I'm going to talk about the process to coordinate going from software and code being written to product or feature being successfully launched in market. What I'm not going to talk about is specific sales or marketing tactics or customer success tactics. We don't have enough time for that. I'm really going to focus on the coordinating process and the function to enable this to happen. And the reason I think this is important is there's a huge volume of literature on Scrum and Agile and software development. There's a lot of literature on things like marketing channels and how to build your sales funnel. But that process in between product and operations, there's not a lot on there. And I'm hoping that this bridges that gap a little bit. So let's get into it. A little bit on me, as Danny said, I'm formerly of Seek. I spent 13 years there working across first our education business and in a variety of roles in the core employment business. I worked in strategy. I ran product development for a few years. Then I ran the whole Australia New Zealand business, which is that core Seek brand. And then finally, as Danny said, I was CEO of Asia Pacific and Americas. That covered about 11 countries, about 3,000 people. Right now, I'm doing some consulting and some advising, a bit of investing, and I'm also taking advantage of lockdown to do some good gaming time with my son. So to set the scene about why I should be talking to you about go-to-market capability, a big part of my experience as a frontline leader at Seek was as we scaled, and particularly as we scaled our product development and technology teams. Way back in 2012, we had a real strong need to transform our company. And we launched a strategy that included heavily investing in our product and tech capability. And after a few years, that strategy really started to pay off. And we actually found that we hit another wall. And that wall was the fact that we had no systematic capability to really take our products to market because it wasn't something that we'd done much of. We had sort of no muscle memory for how to do that. So what I'll give you now is really based off our experience, where we ended up and what we learned worked for us. It is not at all out of a textbook. I'm sure you might be able to find other ways or more formal ways. This is very much based on what worked for us, really based off trial and error. And as I said, I'm going to focus on that formal sort of go-to-market capability as opposed to specific sales and marketing strategies. The agenda really fast, I'll talk about my governing thought, introducing an MVP, how to scale, and then how to take it a bit further. So as I said, that process of going from code being written to successfully launched in product to customers and users. Sort of my overarching or governing thought through this presentation is that you should have a specific individual in your organization responsible for making sure that upcoming releases are communicated clearly and consistently across the organization, and that go-to-market activities are understood, assigned, and undertaken. I'll elaborate a bit more, but one thing I really want to point out right from the start is what I didn't say is that you need one person who does all of these activities. What you need is one person who makes sure that the communication happens and makes sure that those activities are assigned and done. And also, I was thinking about, because I know we've got a lot of very early stage businesses on this call, I think personally that this is probably more appropriate as you start to scale. So as you're pushing sort of 40 or 50 people plus, as you're pushing into 2 or 3 product development teams, or really if you're at the point where you as CEO or CTO aren't able to sort of be intimately involved in every single release. So when you move beyond that stage, I think if you're smaller than that, if you're really only 1 or 2 teams, you as the founder is deeply involved in every release, then this is just happening naturally. So this is more about once you get past that stage, and as founder, you've had to step out of being involved in every release. Now, the number one counter or argument to this governing thought is, why don't you just leave it to the product managers? That's their job. They know their releases. And again, if you've got only one product manager in the whole organization, absolutely, they should just do it. But once you've got multiple product managers, I've tend to found that product managers are often the most time-constrained people in the entire organization. They have huge jobs. They are just so busy. So anything that's non-central to their role that you can offload to someone else and it gets done just as well is really important. Secondly, I do believe it's a slightly different skill set for these go-to-market activities versus being a product manager. And thirdly, even if a product manager can completely do these activities, then there is actually a strong degree of learning and building repeatable processes to make your go-to-market activities really hum. And having multiple people, therefore learning those processes and building those repeatable activities, that's actually really inefficient. It's much more efficient if you can have one person do it. So it offloads work and creates a more efficient process if you can have one person. So how do you start? This concept of what's an MVP go-to-market capability. And this is really if you don't have one or it's pretty ad hoc, how do you start? Just a couple of key elements. Number one, assign it to a specific individual. That to me is absolutely critical. Make sure it's the same person for all product releases and launches. It can absolutely be a part-time role. Do not start with a full-time role. It's just not necessary. But make it a specific person. Don't bounce it around between people. This person should have a few traits. They should be super organized, great attention to detail, great communicator. It's a concept of being polite but persistent. So they're really nice, but they really get stuff done. And they know the whole organization. That's most important. They know everybody in the organization and what they do. And that means that this person could come from multiple backgrounds. They could absolutely be a product manager or an associate product manager. They could be product marketing, they could be customer success. All of them make good go-to-market sort of coordinators. What's more important is their intrinsic skills and their organizational knowledge. And then what does this person do? 3 key aspects. One is awareness. Their absolute critical job is to know what releases are coming up. Number 2, their job is to make sure that this information is communicated succinctly and consistently across the business. Doesn't mean that they have to communicate. In fact, you probably want your product managers communicating themselves. This person's job is to make sure that that communication happens succinctly and crisply and on time. And then the third part, which is again vital, is coordination. This person, your go-to-market coordinator, their job is to make sure that all the tasks that need to be done for a successful launch, that they're understood, that they're assigned, they're understood, and they're undertaken. So again, this person's job is not to do all these tasks. This person's job is to simply make sure that those jobs are allocated and that they happen and they know how to escalate if they're not done. And then finally, to make that happen, this person has to have some form of relationship or reporting line into product, even if it's informal, because that's where all the activity starts. So they have to be well connected into product. So that's how you get going, just a part-time role. So that's as I said, that's what I think is the minimum. This person knows what's happening within the company, communicates it, has the ability and the knowledge to escalate if things aren't happening, and that will absolutely get you started. And then as you start to grow, and as you start to have more products and more teams and the launches get a bit more sophisticated, then you might need to sort of scale up this role to a more experienced person and move to more of a full-time role. The mantra for me would absolutely be lean, lean, lean. Keep the go-to-market function as lean as possible, because the thing that, in my experience, you really want to prevent is you want to prevent go-to-market from sort of doing the doing. You don't want them doing sales jobs. You don't want them doing marketing's work. You don't want them doing all the go-to-market activity. You just want them coordinating. So if you keep it really lean, you actually put a physical cap on how much capacity that person or that team does. But anyway, let's imagine that you need to scale up. You need more than half a half-time resource. Where do you start? Pretty obviously, it moves to more of a full-time sort of go-to-market manager. And this, when you do get to that level, it's really important that that go-to-market manager is connected really strongly into both product and operations, is really connected into both of those leadership teams, if not part of it, because this person needs to be a real physical bridge between those parts of the business. They need to know what's going on in both parts of the business. They need to know what's working well, and they kind of need to know where the frustration or the communication breakdowns might be, and can jump in there and help fix it. So in particular, you might need a full-time resource as the issues start to get more complex. If you're taking bigger, particularly if you're taking new revenue producing products to market, what we've found is that they can be really, really complex. You have to start thinking about, if you're planning on running a marketing campaign, that usually has significant lead times. If it's a revenue producing product, what impact does that have on sales, on your commission structure? Are people using accelerators? Do your teams know how to invoice, know how to provision? Are all the finance and admin parts set up? Are the handovers from sales to customer success really clear? It's a lot of detailed work, but if it's not done up front, it can cause real pain, both internally, and most importantly, it can cause real pain externally for your customers if you haven't got your all of your, I was about to use a bad word, all of your stuff sorted out in advance. Now, one other thing with people that I really recommend you think about is training. Again, as you scale up, and particularly as you have customer facing and revenue producing new products go to market, making sure that your sales, customer service and customer success are adequately trained in those new products before they go to market is really important. And again, I'm not saying you should have a full-time dedicated resource. I'm just saying that one of the activities that needs to get done is training. Make sure your customer service teams in particular are trained on those customers before they're released, so that when you start to get customer inquiries, complaints, troubleshootings, customer service isn't sitting there going, well, I don't know either. So that training element is really important for the go-to-market task. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about artifacts. So when we were really scaling up our product activity, we started to find that our traditional product roadmap, which had our teams and here's what they're working on now, here's what's next, here's what the backlog is, it wasn't quite sufficient for communicating our go-to-market information. So we created another cut of the product roadmap that we really creatively referred to as our go-to-market roadmap. And the key thing that we did here was group each one of our product releases or the work being undertaken by our product teams into one of 4 stages. And those stages were either discovery, build, launch, or scale. And we found that classifying each bit of work into one of those 4 stages really helped to explain to the whole business what each one of those teams were doing and where the different activity was. Discovery is exactly that, doing discovery work, working out the jobs to be done, working out the potential solutions, running some experiments. Build is build. You can imagine build is a hard build. And then launch is when you're doing your initial first proper launch to market. And then scale for us, we were lucky enough that as we started to get bigger, we had an ability to launch our products only to a small percentage of our audience, or maybe it was geofenced. And so scale is when you start to release it to a larger percentage of your audience. And the reason that this was really important is that each one of those steps between stages was a very different go-to-market activity and process, as you can imagine. If something's in discovery, you really don't need to do too much. It's the build to launch that's a key go-to-market step, and the launch to scale is another key go-to-market step. So we found that being able to present the roadmap in this sort of format with this sort of classification really helped communicate to the whole business where things were at, and took a lot of questions that the product teams might get from operations about where something was and when's it coming along. So the go-to-market roadmap was a key artifact across the org, just a one-page that summarizes all the activity. And then sitting behind the go-to-market roadmap for each particular release was effectively a go-to-market lean canvas. And this was just, again, a simple sort of one-pager, but this was what each product manager would work with the go-to-market manager to make sure was in place as they were going from one key stage to the next. And again, one page, super lean, tailored to your organization. This is just one that I mocked up to give an example of what it would cover. But all the basic stuff you'd expect. What's the release? Who's the product owner? Who's the technical owner? What's the value it creates? What are the key metrics? What's success for this launch? And then most importantly, who's the lead from each operations team and what are the activities and tasks they need to do? Just dot points, just simple. Some of those wouldn't be needed all the time. But the key idea is you've got a one pager that everyone's across, and that serves just to make sure that the activities are tracked. It's super lean, it's super fast, it's not heavy bureaucracy, but it gets everything on one page. So that's the artifacts. If I flip to rituals or meetings, again, my major thought here is how do you keep it lean? And to keep it lean, it means wherever you can, don't create new meetings just for go-to-market activities. Try as much as you can to piggyback onto the existing processes, existing meetings, and use those. The one exception that we found is we did need to create a sort of go-to-market review meeting, and that was sort of dependent on the cadence of releases, but we did find that we needed something other than the product review meeting just to talk through what's released, what's worked, what needs to be done. And that was very much getting the product and ops leaders in the room at once just to make sure we were meeting targets and we're happy with the process. But that's a fast, lean meeting. You're not making specific micro decisions. That's an overarching view of what's going on. And beyond that, I'd really encourage you just to use existing processes. In particular, use the existing daily team stand-ups. If you're running Agile or Scrum, use those team stand-ups to coordinate your go-to-market activities. What I really like about this idea is it prevents you from creating a whole nother set of meetings. And most importantly, you bring the reps from, say, sales or marketing or customer success, you bring them to the product development team, to their daily stand-up, and it makes them feel like part of that team. It really helps to break down the walls. And they just run it, even the go-to-market, you just run like a normal stand-up. What have you done? What are you doing next? What help do you get? And the other thing it does is it stops go-to-market and ops feeling like product are throwing it over the wall and feeling like it's a separate part, because you want your product team thinking that go-to-market activities are a crucial part of the overall product development process. And you want your sales and marketing and ops teams feeling like they're in it too, and they're not just getting handed something they're not part of. So use the existing daily team stand-up as the coordinating mechanism would be my advice. And then again, as I've said, if you get revenue producing products, you've got to think about your sales targeting, setting processes. Again, don't create other meetings, use those processes that already exist, but make sure go-to-market activities are coordinated in there. So just to summarize, people, keep it really lean as possible, fewer higher skilled people. Artifacts, think about some form of roadmap and a one-page canvas for major launches or releases. And rituals, as much as possible, incorporate go-to-market into existing activities, bring the teams together, make it part of the product development process. And then finally, maybe just to change pace a little, is where can you take, if you do build, a really humming, tiny, small go-to-market team, where can you take it? And for me, what became really interesting for us at Seek is we saw some opportunities and we saw some challenges. If I talk about some challenges, we found that as we started to release a lot more revenue producing products, we effectively went from one product to 3 or 4 or 5 products. We found that there was actually no one who specifically focused on product line revenue. And that also meant that we were missing business level opportunities to improve product line revenue. And why did that happen? Well, because our business was focused around customer segments. So our whole sales team was all around, was focused on recruiters or corporate or enterprise and SMEs, and they were very separate. And for sales and for the whole business, what really mattered was less what specific products were we selling, and more, are we hitting the overall target? That's how we were defined, and that's how the targets were set, and that worked fine for us. But once we had 5 or 6 different revenue producing products, it meant that they individually weren't being focused on as hard as they should be. Now, to be clear, each team did look for opportunities in their team, but if you're a product manager and there's an issue with your product, you're going to look at product ways to fix it. If you're a salesperson, you'll look at sales way to fix it. And what we really found we needed was someone who's almost sitting above that and looking very objectively at that product and saying, hey, this product isn't meeting expectations. Why? Is it a sales issue? Is it a marketing issue? Is it a product issue? And unless you're sort of objective, if you're a carpenter, everything's a nail and you use a hammer, right? Because that's your tool. So who's objectively looking at those opportunities? And we found that building a really small, highly analytical team out of go-to-market worked really well for us because they were already adept at looking across the business at opportunities. So this team became responsible for revenue maximization of individual products in a really data-driven way. And their job was to identify the problem and then go to the team and work with that team to fix that problem. And that worked really well. In fact, our product team really liked it. I was worried that there might be some conflict. The product might view that that's their job. But in fact, our product teams, they want to build stuff. They didn't want to spend a whole lot of time going back and analyzing revenue. So it worked really well. And then once we had a small team focused on product revenue, the natural extension out of this really became that team taking responsibility for pricing and bundling. Pricing and bundling are hard. They are complex, specialized skills because, again, you need to think about the whole business. What's the impact of bundling changes or pricing changes, not just on product, on sales, on revenue recognition, on customer service, etc. So building that pricing and bundling capability out of this product revenue opportunity, a product revenue team, that really pushed that team into what we ended up calling commercial excellence, because that was their job to maximize our commercial outcomes. So if you build that go-to-market capability, think about extensions in product revenue optimization, in pricing, in bundling. And with that, what I hope that I've been able to do today is provide some initial guidance on how to start building your go-to-market capability, why I think it's really important to have a single individual that you can start building some skills into, who learns how to take those away, and then how to develop it and extend it. If you want to get in contact or talk offline, these are my details. Pretty easy to reach me. You can find me on LinkedIn. There's not many people with my last name, so I'm pretty easy to find. And just finally, I want to give a shout out to two people from Seek: Lucy Clem, who was sort of our initial go-to-market magician. She's fabulous. And Emmett Shepherd, who I brought in as our first commercial excellence director, who really built that function within Seek. Did amazing jobs, and a lot of this I've stolen from everything that they learnt while they were going through it at Seek. And with that, I'll hand back to you, Danny.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So a couple of questions to start off with. Typically, how senior would this go-to-market hire be? And you've mentioned some of the skills that they might need to have, like coordination, but are there any specific or concrete skills that they must have?
Yeah, great. In terms of senior, not particularly starting off with that coordinator role, we had our go-to-market people as, I'd say, equivalent to like an associate product manager. That was completely fine, because it's very much a coordination role. In terms of specific skills, you want to be really, really clear on this person's organizational skills. So their ability to take a set of tasks, put it into a very simple but detailed, very simple but easy to understand spreadsheet or whatever format you use. But you want those organizational skills where they can take a list of activities, organize them, and communicate them very clearly and succinctly. And then, so that's the starting point. Could be, like I said, equivalent to that associate product manager when you're in that coordinator level. And then as you get a bit more senior, because some of the go-to-market questions can get actually really tough, particularly in the revenue producing stuff, and you've got to be able to work with finance and admin and invoicing and billing and sales and everything else, then again, it sort of moves up. The go-to-market manager is sort of equivalent to a product manager or an entry-level product manager.
Awesome. So if it's a part-time person, do you see them working elsewhere in the org? And if so, what skill sets do they need? Like if they were to kind of be a bit more of a hybrid role, and this is potentially for an earlier stage startup.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that if it's earlier, I really like the idea of this potentially being someone in customer success, because it's customer success who are going to deal with a lot of the downstream issues. So you can have potentially someone who's a really high performing customer success associate or customer success manager, but are really interested in product. This is a really good way for them to connect into product. And you can often segment, say, 3 days a week, you're doing CSM, and 2 days a week you're doing the go-to-market coordination activities. Now, it won't be that perfect, but in terms of hours per day, you can imagine it's sort of 40% of your hours on go-to-market and 60% hours of your customer success. We had some really good success bringing people from that team into those two areas.
Awesome. What are the best ways to communicate across the companies? With remote ways of working?
Yeah, really challenging because of the email overload and the classic, well, we'll just make sure we've got a nice consistent email template and out it will go. I mean, you sort of have to do that, but it's really not enough. It's going to be different for each org. If you're a small org, then the more that you can just actually talk about it. So if your organization does larger team stand-ups or scrum of scrums, in particular, we use that sort of, full team product review or that scrum of scrum concepts, just to really briefly mention here's the key releases coming up, here's the key go-to-market, not to run through them, but to mention them. So I was a big fan of that scrum of scrums where you have all the product managers just standing up around the big board. Here's all the things that are happening. It's a great way to mention it to make sure everyone's on board. And we ended up making sure that there were key reps from ops, from sales and marketing and customer service at those scrums, not 20 people, one person, we pull them away, but that was really, really key. And then whatever you need to do, I think using Slack as much as possible is useful. I think most people are pretty used to using that, but just relying on email, it's going to fall over with how busy people are. So the more you can physically talk about it, the better.
And how would that work across countries? Say your team is split up and you've got to communicate this go-to-market strategy. I guess you might need to use email a little bit, but would then Slack be the preferred communication?
Yeah, it's really hard. I was a bit more fortunate that we were sort of up time zones to Asia, so you might be out a couple of hours, but you could still bring people in to talk through. And even if because it was all remote, it was all on Zoom meetings, and you could run through it. So email becomes better. I think if you're in really different time zones, if you're in West Coast or Europe, that go-to-market coordinator role then becomes even more important, because that person is going to need to be following up to make sure people got it, make sure they're aware, make sure their activities, and then make sure that it's clear that they're the channel for questions. Because when you've got those remote teams, it's often getting the information to them can work. The challenge comes when those teams then have questions. They have follow-up questions, or they're not sure about things. It's hard just physically from time zones, but often they feel a reluctance, like, oh, this is a dumb question, I'm bothering people back in head office, particularly if head office is somewhere else. You want to make sure that go-to-market manager or coordinator is really open, and all of those people in those remote offices feel that I can just reach out to that person with even the dumbest of questions, because that's often where it'll fall down. They'll get the first level of communication, but they won't get that loop, or they won't feel like they can loop back in and ask all those questions and get that tidy up. So I think that coordinating role becomes really, really important if you've got offices in different time zones.
Awesome. So we've got 2 more questions we'll try and get through. What were the skills of the GTM revenue optimization team? And second part to that question, how early can you bring that person on? So could you bring that person on in an early stage startup?
In terms of what time, I think for me, it would be driven by whether it's an issue within my organization. So if I feel like if we're structured around products and sales and the team are really driven by product line, then you probably don't need it. But if your customer segments are more based on the enterprise versus SME, etc., and you feel like it's an issue for us, the reason we started to move to that product revenue optimization is because we could feel that it was an issue, that there wasn't really clear, hard ownership of the specific product lines. So in terms of time, I'd say, well, when do you think it's an issue, and the size of the issue warrants the investment in the resource? Because you want to make sure that, if the resource, to answer the first part of the question, which was on the skills, it needs to be someone who's really analytical, really objective, very open-minded, because you need that person or that small team to be able to recognize this isn't performing, but not go in with any bias, not be able to be swayed by someone's comments. Oh, no, we're doing fine, it's not us. You need someone who can really analytically decide or work out or have a hypothesis about what the problem is. And sometimes it's not going to be perfect, you're not going to know, but they've got a hypothesis, and then they know how to go from hypothesis to experiment to action. So that's really important. The other part, which is sometimes hard to find this in the same person, in the same individual, is they have to be able to communicate that to someone in a really empathetic and compassionate way, because it's not easy to sit in an analytical team and then go out to an operating team and say, hey, I think there's a problem with our sales process for this product. I think you need to change it. The ability to have that conversation in a way where your sales manager or your sales team is on board and doesn't take offense at that's genuine. That's a real issue. So you need a very small, highly analytical, very objective team. Knows how to run a hypothesis, do an experiment, but also has the communication skills and the people skills to be able to communicate that and get people on side rather than get people offside. And finding that in the one or two individuals can be a challenge.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So that's all the time we have today with Michael. As you can see, his details are here if you want to get in touch with him. Just on behalf of Blackbird and everyone who's joined the call today, thank you so much. That was awesome advice. So hopefully everyone will join us next week for a session on insight development with startup advisor Dean McAvoy. Thanks everyone, and we'll see you next week. Thanks so much, Michael.
Thanks, Annie.